thanks for joining today. I am very fortunate to be blessed with Sarah Duval joining me today. Sarah's been a friend of mine for a number of years now, and when it comes to women's health issues in the fitness world, she's always my go-to person to talk about things. And a couple weeks ago, I put out a request to followers of the Barbell Physio on what everyone wanted to hear more about this year. And without a doubt, the biggest thing people wanted to hear about was postpartum issues, women's health issues. So thank you very much for coming on with us today, Sarah. If you would, for people that aren't familiar with you, will you give them a couple minute intro to what you're about and what you're doing?
Absolutely. I was an ortho PT for years, just general ortho, and had a couple babies. Realized there's such a lack of postpartum info out there for women that want to be in great shape, and even for women that just want to walk and play on the playground with their kids. There's also a lack of info there. But for women who want to be a part of CrossFit, want to do extreme sports, want to really push the envelope postpartum, it's kind of lacking in the knowledge of pelvic floor and diastasis recovery for getting things to that higher level.
Yeah, there absolutely is, and something that I hear all the time. And unfortunately, when they go back to their primary care, their OBGYN, they're told Kegels.
And they're told, just stop doing it. Just stop doing it. Well, why do you want to deadlift? Why do you want to run? What's wrong with you? Just quit doing things.
And unfortunately for me, everybody that's watching this right now probably understands, because you wouldn't follow me if you don't, the importance of squats and deadlifts and things like that. But when it comes to bridging that gap, there's just a huge gap there. And not enough people are filling that gap. And that's why I feel so fortunate to have you in my corner to help me out when I have problems like that. But would you tell us, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making postpartum when they're trying to get back to CrossFit or powerlifting, Olympic lifting, or just in general being more fit and doing whatever home exercise program they're doing?
Absolutely. Well, let's kind of take it in parts. So let's talk general problems, and then let's talk some specifics on diastasis and specifics on pelvic floor. All right, so you're going to keep me on track.
Okay.
Okay, so general mistakes is just the obvious that screams at you is too much too soon. Okay, and I find this happens the worst with women that stay in shape during pregnancy. And I know everybody's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that. But when a woman stays in shape during pregnancy, she comes out of delivery and she's like, I feel pretty good. I'm ready to head back to the gym. My shoulders feel great. My back feels good. Probably my glutes feel great. Like my quads are strong. But their core and pelvic floor just went through a major trauma. So when you're pregnant, you have all this space taking up room in your abs in the front. And then when that baby suddenly comes out, all the space is gone. So the baby was using pressure to help stabilize your spine. And so when we talk about that optimal length tension relationship of your abdominal muscles, you've lost that length tension adaptation because it's gone so quickly, your body can't recover. So you've got to give that a little bit of time to heal and go back to adapting and give your transverse abdominals and the rest of your abs a chance to go back to their normal size before you really do a whole lot of heavy loading, because everything is a core exercise, or at least it should be, especially when you get into the heavy realms.
Yeah.
So I find the ones that are in better shape just feel like they can jump in too quick before their pelvic floor has had a chance to heal as well.
Yeah, let me jump back to that length tension relationship, because for people that are following us that aren't rehab professionals or fitness professional, that's a really important concept to understand here. A muscle is stronger when it's in its middle ranges of motion. So like if you see somebody at the gym and they're cranking out a ton of half rep pull-ups, what are they doing? They're never fully bringing themselves over the barbell. They're never fully locking out, because in that middle range of motion, they're the strongest.
So it's easiest.
It's easiest. When you're pregnant and everything's stretched out, like you're talking about, that length tension relationship changes. And so that muscle now becomes really long, and it has enough strength and stability combined with the pressure of the baby to give you some core strength if you're trying to stay fit through pregnancy. But then all of a sudden you change that length tension relationship, and it's like your muscle is always at its maximum length right after pregnancy until it has time to readjust back to normal.
And we readapt. The body readapts very quickly but it does take some time. So it will get back there.
You can't change that biological healing time. It cracks me up sometimes when people come to the office and they're like, hey, I got tendinopathy for the last 6 months. Can you rub this thing for 2 minutes and make it magically go away? I'm like, no, biology takes time. Unfortunately, like you said, the human body heals and adapts. But
we've got to give it a little time. So so there's that obvious. I would like to look at it as an ACL repair. You're not going to send that person back out on the soccer field 2 weeks after surgery because they need to go through very important steps. And I feel like pregnancy should be looked at the same way. If you have a C-section, that is major surgery. If you have a vaginal delivery, that is setting your body up, your pelvic floor up for an increased risk of, I hate to use the word failure because that's very negative, and I don't like being negative when it comes to postpartum issues. But when you have a vaginal delivery, that's setting you up for risk of prolapse and leaking and having pelvic floor issues. So it's doubly important for either delivery method that you have to take very specific steps to get back to being able to do whatever you want. And I feel like that process gets rushed. And I feel like that process is not defined well places. It's not in all the coaching gyms are not like, oh yes, we have this postpartum program, so that's my goal. Get this nice set postpartum program where a woman has a baby and she comes in and every trainer and every PT knows, okay, they need to go through these steps to get back to being able to do whatever they want.
Yeah, can you give us a couple of those steps just so people have a little bit of an idea where they need to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So reestablishing breathing. So how they breathe, because that gets all messed up with that baby being in there. So it's pushing up on the diaphragm, it's pushing organs out of the way. So our breathing is how we basically optimize our core and pelvic floor control. So breathing is the center of our core. It's the center of how everything works in our body and how we stabilize our spine. So that breathing system gets messed up. So we've got to reestablish great breathing. We've got to reestablish optimal core function. And some of that takes a little time, but we can also speed it up by encouraging the muscles to fire correctly. And then getting the pelvic floor back on board. So I find about 50% of the women I see, their pelvic floor actually responds by tightening up, which can cause hip pain, it can cause a side joint pain, it can cause all kinds of other issues. So making sure their pelvic floor is working optimally as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you mentioned that it tightens up because if it tightens up, it's not, Kegels aren't always the answer there.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's move on to the pelvic floor mistake, and then we'll go back into some fun, serious lifting things. So like I said, I see about 50% of the women, their pelvic floor is actually tight. And then the other 50%, Kegels are going to help. They're great. They're perfect. But that's why so many women do Kegels and they do Kegels and they do Kegels. And I get emails all the time and I see patients all the time where they're like, I'm getting worse. I'm doing what I was told and I'm getting worse. And it's so hard and it's heartbreaking. It's like you just got the worst advice for your body. So when we think about that, if a muscle is really tight and we try to contract it, there's nowhere for it to go. Right? So to be able to get a great pelvic floor contraction, which means protecting against prolapse, it means stopping leaking, right? We've got to be able to get that optimal link to the pelvic floor. But if the pelvic floor can't relax down and can't lengthen, then it can't contract fully. So when you go to do a lift, you've got to be able to contract your pelvic floor. So if it's tight, then you're not going to be able to do that. And doing more Kegels is the opposite of good advice.
So that's the pelvic floor range.
Yes. And that's just basic pelvic floor stuff. So that's pretty, I don't want to say pretty easy, but it just takes a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of understanding. And then you're going to feel comfortable with the pelvic floor. You're going to be able to talk to women. You're going to be able to ask them key questions. You're going to be able to talk to a pelvic floor PT if you need to and really understand what's going on. And then I like to modify based on what's there. So if somebody has a tight pelvic floor, I like to modify cueing for exercise. We're going to focus more on our inhales. We're going to focus more on letting the pelvic floor go. We're going to focus more on not gripping abs. And then likewise, if their pelvic floor is a little bit kind of low tone, so if they had a vaginal delivery that maybe lasted longer than a couple hours, then their pelvic floor might have said, all right, I'm going to take a little vacation and I'm just going to relax and I'm not going to show up. So then for that woman, we want to cue Kegels And let's say she's doing a deadlift or she's doing a squat. We want to cue that really great exhale. We want to cue that pelvic floor tightening. And if we can address it in training and an exercise, then we can help her recover so much faster. But we got to know what's going on.
Are there a couple key things that women or coaches or therapists should look for when trying to figure out if somebody is tight and doesn't need to be doing Kegels? What are the key things there?
Okay, so oftentimes the woman will tell you that she's doing Kegels, but she doesn't feel like she can get a good contraction or it's not really working. So sometimes that alone can be a cue. Yeah. Painful sex. So this is kind of personal, but if you're comfortable asking the questions, and usually people are very comfortable asking them, you're in a environment where you talk to patients all day long. So it's how we approach the person in front of us that I feel like makes a big difference. Right. So, all right. So painful sex. All right. Now go ahead, have a seat, or if you're listening to this, go ahead and have a seat. All right. So I want you to feel your ischial tuberosity. So those are the bones that you're sitting on. Those are your sits bones. Okay, do you feel like your sits bones are directly connecting to the chair, or do you feel like there's some fleshy stuff underneath one or underneath both? So do you feel like you're sitting through tissue, or do you feel like the bones are resting on the chair, and does that feel equal?
Feels equal to me.
Okay, good. Well, your hips are in great shape, but if somebody had, one thing I see is pelvic floor dysfunction where one side is tight and not the other. So one of the clues that I look for is have somebody sit and they're like, oh yeah, they'll say, oh, I feel like I have a little bit more fleshiness. Like if I'm going to measure from the middle to that sits bone, they'll be like, oh, I feel like this one side is a little bit closer to the middle and I feel more fleshiness, like I'm sitting on more tissue on one side than the other. And then you're like, your pelvic floor is tight on that side. So then we can do some external release stuff like sitting on the ball. We can do some opening things like engaging the iliacus, like getting the opposite muscles to fire so that we can really open that side of the pelvic floor. And then all of a sudden, I've worked on the exercise. This stuff is so exciting. Can you tell? I just love it. So I've worked on the exercise side with pelvic floor PTs because I help pelvic floor PTs from the outside. And I've been able to pair people with the right exercise and their pelvic floor strength has doubled in a session before, like with doing some of the right things. So it's pretty cool because sometimes the pelvic floor can just shut down because of that tightness. Mm-hmm. And if we can address it through the right exercises, it changes everything.
Very cool. The other thing that you mentioned before that you and I have had several talks about in the past is diastasis recti, mm-hmm. where essentially if we're looking at your six-pack muscles, your rectus abdominis, there's a thin layer of connective tissue that connects the two sides of that six-pack. And a lot of times in women or in people not properly exercising, mm-hmm. that muscle connection can be split. So think of it as like a hamstring tear, but you're just splitting the hamstring down the middle. And that's essentially what you're doing to your rectus abdominis. Happens quite a bit in postpartum women just due to the pressure of the baby, basically splitting that muscle apart. What are the specific things that women dealing with, or let's first start with, how would you diagnose yourself with having this, or examine yourself for having this, and then what are the things that are specific to rehabbing from that? So
the cool part is that a study that showed 100% of women have a diastasis when they go into the delivery room. So basically we all have it. So then the question needs to be, why do some recover fast and some don't recover at all? So that is the question that I like to ask. And that's where when you get into how do we rehab it? So what are those women doing differently? How are they loading their bodies? But first, let's talk about testing. Okay, so if you lie on your back, knees bent, and you place your hand in the middle, in that linea alba where those two muscles connect, and you lift your head, does it feel like a trampoline? Do you feel some firmness underneath your hand? Or do you feel like it's squishy and it sinks, or it's wider than two fingers? And so that's pretty much an easy way to test. And then you can test during exercises. So sometimes I'll have somebody who looks good when they do that, but then when they go to do, let's say, a kipping pull-up, remember, I think I've shared some still frames with you of kipping pull-ups where they go to do a kipping pull-up. We have
that in an article that I'll link to after this video and my website.
Perfect, yeah. And they go to really load that anterior load on the core, and then you can see their diastasis bulging out or gapping significantly, and the same thing can happen under a heavy load for squats. So kind of having a coach or even videotaping yourself, doing it maybe with your shirt pulled up so you can see what's going on with your abs. And if you're getting bulging out of your abs, that's a sign that you have a diastasis, and it may only come out when you load heavy, or it may come out when you're lying on the floor. But that would be how I would look and check for that.
Okay, and you said there are some things that some women will do differently than others. You mentioned kipping pull-ups. What's some other things that you see there?
For things where it's
that kind of lead to that development.
Where it's not healing. So it's the too much too soon. So we've got to give that connective tissue time to heal. So women who jump back into the regular workouts, they're doing front planks, they're doing kipping pull-ups, they're doing those heavy anterior load exercises where they're really working their abs, and even like V-sits, even push-ups might be a bit too much strain, especially in the beginning. So I'd modify those by going a little higher. So the too much too soon, just you've got to give yourself time to heal. That belly was just really stretched out. So respecting that. And then I also like having really pregnant women kind of back off of those front loading things toward the end of their pregnancy as well. So we're not really stressing that connective tissue with heavy exercise.
Then would your return and your progression kind of be the same, I'm guessing, as the general progressions we talked about earlier, where you're really going to work on restoring breathing, proper muscle function at a low level, and then slowly building up. Just like when you first started squatting, you started with the barbell.
Yes.
And next session you added a little weight, and the next session a little weight. You didn't just start with 400 pounds. Well, some people did. I'm jealous of those people, but.
Or you started with a kettlebell in the front, and you did a more of a sumo squat. That's super easy. Yeah. So that progression, really respecting that progression, and then checking at every stage. But as you increase demand, so starting with like bird dogs, hands and knees, seeing how your diastasis feels there, then moving to some modified planks where you're maybe doing planks up on the squat rack, where your arms are extended and you're at an elevated surface. Then working your way down to the ground, working on regular strict pull-ups before going to a kipping pull-up. So being able to master those basics.
You got me excited.
Mastering the basics.
Strict versus kipping, something that I've written about quite a bit, but
people like to skip steps. It's like, oh, I can't do it the regular controlled way, so let me just throw a lot of momentum in there. That's going to be better for my body.
and it's unfortunate that can lead to anatomical problems coming up, but more importantly for most people is not the potential risk for injury. It's more that you're going to hit a ceiling in your performance when you don't master these basic things first, and maybe you get to where you're doing kipping pull-ups and you get up to where you're doing 10, but because you never developed that strict pull-up from the start, you're not going to get to where you can do 20 kipping pull-ups, or because you didn't get your breathing function right. When you get back to CrossFit, you're able to start deadlifting heavy again, but then we get into a WOD that's going to require you doing deadlifts and a cardiovascular component combined, and because the breathing plus core function together aren't matched up properly, you're going to have a ceiling on what you can do there in a CrossFit workout like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's you, and you don't rehab your body properly coming back from a baby. It's just like lacking the rehab on any injury, and it's going to affect your performance at some point.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about pelvic floor. Like one thing with those kipping pull-ups, since we're on pull-ups, one thing, I have so many women that end up with prolapse 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months after they deliver a baby. And they're like, what happened? Even women that have had a C-section, 8 months postpartum, they do something like an overhead press and they're not breathing properly and they overload their pelvic floor and they end up with prolapse. So really teaching the basics of how to load the pelvic floor so it's second nature. So then when somebody wants to push in whatever, even if that's lifting a stroller over their head to do a normal mom thing versus, anything in the gym, their pelvic floor is ready and their system is ready. So I feel like this is a big piece of the puzzle that's missing for prolapse prevention, because I feel like so much prolapse can be prevented if we would just lift safer.
Yeah. Anything else to add as far as general diastasis, pelvic floor stuff? It's such a broad topic.
It is such a broad topic. I'm like, everything.
15 minutes, but I know you and I could talk for an hour on it.
Yeah, there's so much that's preventable. There's so much. It's just, there's so much that's preventable. And then once it happens, there's so much that can be done. I've rehabbed diastasis that is 20 years old. people who have had it for 20 years and we have fixed it. Like it's prolapse that I've helped years and years and years later. It's never too late, I think, but once a woman is postpartum, she's always postpartum. So I think that's an important thing to recognize. It's not like, okay, well, I'm 7 years postpartum. A lot of women start leaking later. They might have kids that are starting into kindergarten. They're like, all right, I'm going to go CrossFit. I'm going to get in shape. This is great. I got some freedom. I got my life back. And all of a sudden, she's starting to leak. And you're like, well, maybe that's just a normal part of the process. And it's not. It's preventable. We can fix it. So and it's not that hard to fix. You just need to know a little more. So I think that's the one I want to leave people with is there's more.
Cool. Well, you have an excellent course that I'm fortunate to be going through at a little slower pace than most people because of the demands in my schedule. But I know you just reopened enrollment here in January. The next course starts really, really soon. Can you tell people about that?
Absolutely. It is for personal trainers, physical therapists, CrossFit coaches. Oh, I've got a great CrossFit coach in my one-on-one now that I've been working with, and she is going to revolutionize her gym. I'm so excited, or her box, I guess I should say. I'm just so excited for the postpartum women that are going to go see her. But it's basically giving those steps. What do you do when somebody walks in the door and they have prolapse and they say, I want to pick up a barbell, but I have prolapse? I mean, that usually makes any coach freak out a little bit, and most ortho PTs for that matter. So it is kind of that what do you do? How do you understand pelvic floor issues? How do you help these women reach their goals while you help their bodies get in the best shape and you fix these problems?
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the CrossFit person there, because it actually happened in Charlotte recently where a CrossFit gym has actually started to promote a postpartum fitness class where they're kind of going through these smart step-by-step progressions. And it's a huge business opportunity for a lot of people in the fitness world, not just physical therapists and chiropractors wanting to help out in that stage of things. But if you're a gym, there's a huge market out there of postpartum women that want to get back to CrossFit, and you can be continually running these classes as a little niche class inside of your CrossFit gym.
Nobody wants to
gym
pee
right
themselves.
Now has a gymnastics class, has a barbell class.
Yeah.
You be the only CrossFit gym in your area to offer a postpartum. Think of how many women are coming into your box for that can then potentially be long-term customers for your box versus the other boxes around you. I think it's an awesome opportunity that more people need to know about, not only to help women out, but to help your business succeed better down the road.
Well, and I think you're going to get that unique woman that wants to be in good shape, but she needs the resources, and she's the one who's most likely going to end up in a bad place because she's going to push herself, and she's the one that needs that guidance the most. So, yeah, I think that's awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing a little knowledge with us. I'll be sure to link to the articles you've written for my website on these issues. We'll link to your website and to that course as well after the video. Thank you very much for joining us here.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.